All right, Stan, second segment. I've got a few photos here
Oh my
to
days.
prompt you
Look at these,
about your
everybody.
career.
So this was 1989, and it was a non-league club, Stafford Rangers, which is only about 5 or 6 miles away from where I live. And I was an apprentice at Wolverhampton Wanderers, which is in the Championship now. And I used to clean the boots, and then I got released. I thought I was going to get a contract. I was scoring lots of goals, and I thought it's a matter of time before they give me a contract, and they didn't. So I left Wolves, and I had a phone call from the manager the next day saying, at Stafford Rangers, said, come and join us.
Yep.
And a lot of other young players that had been released from football clubs joined as well. And I was there for about 14, 15 months. First season, I was really disappointed I didn't play well because I thought I was never going to get an opportunity to be a professional. This was semi-professional. Right. But in the second season, I buckled down, scored lots of goals. And then a guy called Steve Coppell, Manchester United legend. He managed Crystal Palace, he managed Manchester City. He was a great winger for Manchester United and for England. Invited me down to a trial for Crystal Palace and said, would I come for a week? So I went for a week's trial. Thought, I've done okay. And at the end of the week, he said, do I want to play for Crystal Palace? So that's me at 20. And as you see, the very dodgy moustache got trimmed down very, very quickly.
Yeah. So you played with Ian Wright in this team,
Yeah, so it was a great team. It was the last season of the old First Division before the Premier League started. Yeah. So it was 1991. And Ian Wright and Mark Bright were the two strikers, John Solarco, Alan Pardew, that's now the manager of Crystal Palace. Yeah. So very much the guys that are at Crystal Palace now. Mark Bright is an ambassador at the club. John Solarco's on the staff. Andy Woodman was a goalkeeper, and Alan Pardew. They've gone full circle. They've all gone different places to learn their trade, and they've gone back to Crystal Palace. So I lived in South London for 2 or 3 years, and this was probably the place where I learnt the most about being a striker, what the expectations are, the basic runs of a striker. And we had a very good coaching setup that like I say, I learnt a lot from.
Yeah. In your book as well, you mentioned that fashion was a big part of, the boys in the locker room. Who was the flashiest back then? Do you remember?
Well,
or was it you?
It certainly wasn't me. In my career, it was probably, as we fast forward a little bit, John Barnes, because he used to wear some really dodgy, bright suits. I remember him turning up at Melwood, and we were allowed to wear suits now. Sometimes track suits, club track suits. Sometimes you're allowed to wear your own suit. And he had a canary yellow suit with lots of different cuts.
Wow.
Holes in the suit, and that was
an eyesore.
That was, I mean, John Barnes is Jamaican, and those Jamaicans, when they dress, they can dress with the worst of them. It's fair to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we turn it over?
Speaking of flashy.
Yes,
nice
the white suit cup final. That's Lee Sharp, who's still a good friend. He's from in the Midlands near me.
Yep.
And this suit gets a lot of stick because in the 1996 FA Cup final, obviously the end of the season, it's the showcase of English football. And again, we're at the Melwood training complex, and David James was modelling for Armani at that point. So he said, well, Armani wants to provide the suits. Yep. So Giorgio Armani came to Melwood, and all the lads were in awe of this great legend of designing. Yeah. And we went through the swatches, and grey and black and blue and
boring.
And I think it might have been John Barnes said, oh, look at this cream one. Thankfully it wasn't yellow.
Yeah.
But we all thought it was great at the time. So it was an Armani suit. We all had Ray-Bans on, not in that picture. But if we'd have won that cup final, we lost by the odd goal. Eric Cantona scored very late on. And Roy Keane said in his book it was the toughest game he'd played in his life because there was just nothing given across the pitch. Yeah. If we'd have won that, the white suit would have been the kind of start of something special. Yeah. But because we lost, it was seen as a sort of a negative thing. Yeah. And of course, the sort of story of the Spice Boys, of decadence, and all of that kind of thing. So I've still got mine. I should
Yeah.
have brought. Next time I come to Malaysia in sunnier times, I shall. It'll be perfect for sunny weather
for this weather, yeah.
in Malaysia. I'll bring it with me to show you.
Yeah, but Stan, I had to ask you, right? So you've been both ends of the spectrum. You were a footballer, and then now you work in the media. So in hindsight, if you were doing what you do now back then, what would you have commented about the Spice Boys?
I think probably been very critical of a group of extremely talented players that didn't quite hit the benchmarks, but I also would have been critical of management, because I think that there's no point of having a manager unless a manager is going to have an influence on a group of players.
Yeah.
And we had a particularly young group of players. I mean, Fowler was 20, I was 25, I was one of the older ones. Jamie Redknapp was 22, 23, likewise McManaman. So we had a very young group of players that if we'd have played for his manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, I think that it would have just been turned on its head.
Yeah.
Because Sir Alex Ferguson had a very similar group of players, Beckham, Scholes, the Nevilles, but he was really hard on them. And I think that that's what we needed as a group of young players.
Okay.
That's Craig Short. He was actually one of the toughest defenders I ever played against. This was before the rule changes I think the rules changed about 1995, whereby after 1995 you couldn't tackle a player from behind.
Oh, okay.
Before that, the first 30 seconds of a game, the ball would come to you as a striker, and the next thing you'd see would be your backside or your boots, because the defender would just hit you and hit you hard. And he was a very, very hard defender. But this was Southend United, and this is a very, very happy memory for me, because I was released from Crystal Palace. They said, look, you're not going to get an opportunity here. I was there for 2.5, 3 years, and a guy called Colin Murphy said, I've watched you a lot in the reserves at Crystal Palace. I would love you to come and play as a central striker, because at Crystal Palace I was playing as a winger. So I made my debut against Notts County on a cold Friday night. The Southend fans, I think there was about 3,000 people there. They wanted the chairman out because they weren't happy with him, they weren't happy with the direction of the club. And I scored 2 goals, helped save us from relegation. I think I scored 18 in 25 games. And for me, it was the first time in my career that I was a striker in my own right, and I wasn't back up to Ian Wright or Mark Bright, it was me. And I was only there for 6 months before going to Nottingham Forest, but in terms of a 6-month period where you are happy and productive, that was probably one of the happiest times of my life.
Yeah, one of your finest achievements.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Going into the next one.
So here we go, which is probably the most productive time in a football shirt. Brian Clough, the great legendary Nottingham Forest manager that had won the league with them, that had won 2 European Cups, an absolute legend of English football. He nearly bought me when I was at Southend, but he watched a game I played and he said, no, maybe a year after, but he retired. He was very poorly. So this was a guy that it was almost a situation that Sir Alex Ferguson had when he left. Who was going to replace a legend, and who was going to replace a legend that had been there for 20-something years, as Brian Clough had? And it was a guy called Frank Clark that played for Brian Clough when he won the European Cup, and he paid £2 million to take me from Southend. And it wasn't plain sailing at first, because the club had been relegated into the Championship with the Premier League team. And we were in the first 5 or 6 games, we were, I think, 4th from bottom of the league, really struggling. I remember a couple of goals in the Capital One Cup against Wrexham, and then I flew. For 2 seasons, I scored 50 goals in 68 games, and we went from the Championship into the Premier League and finished 3rd in the Premier League. So my most productive time, used to pick the ball up and run at people. You can see there, big physical specimen of a striker with my New Balance boots, which are now making a bit of a comeback worldwide.
They are.
And a very, very happy time for me.
Yep. All right.
Yeah. So yes, this is the game of the century.
Yep.
There's let's have a look. There's Peter Beardsley. There's Steve Howie, a defender that I was playing up against, and that's Les Ferdinand. And well, quite simply, it was 2 teams that played attractive, open, attacking football in that 95-96 season. And the other team that completed that were Manchester United. But like I say, they had the steel that we didn't. Newcastle often won games. They were called the entertainers. So they were winning games 5-2, 5-1, 4-3. And it was a night at Anfield under the lights. I think it might have been a Wednesday game, which weren't so frequent in those days. And within 30 seconds of the kick-off, I moved down the left wing, ball comes to me, I cross the ball in, Robbie Fowler, header, 5 yards, 1-0. And then it was just like tennis, 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, 3-2. And some incredible attacking talent on display. David Ginola, Faustino Asprilla, the wonderful Colombian player, Peter Beardsley that we mentioned, and Les Ferdinand. And I think that rightly, I've watched a lot of football matches, probably commentated in the last 5 or 6 years on 400. And this still by far and away is the best. And I played in it and I scored the winner in it, so fantastic.
Would you have done anything differently?
I think we all would have perhaps been a little bit more professional at times, been a little bit more disciplined. But like I say, we take responsibility for that. But still on the pitch, there were some fantastic times, and this probably epitomised how good this team was.
Okay, next one.
Make sure I get the right chronology.
That's you in Villa.
Yes, so I moved to Aston Villa, which was the team that I supported as a kid, as Paul Merson and Dion Dublin. And, you know, I love my club to this day. I've been going to Aston Villa as a fan since I was 6. And to be able to then play for the club was a dream come true. But when I joined Villa, I joined a club that I think had finished 3rd or 4th in the Premier League the season that I was at Liverpool. But the squad wasn't as good. And I think that the expectation was, let's sign Stan Collymore and he's going to make a huge difference. And actually it went the other way. I had a lot of personal issues, a lot of depression and mental health issues, which I've spoken about many times. And it was a very, very bad couple of years. Didn't score many goals. One highlight that probably stood out was a UEFA Cup game against Atletico Madrid, which we won 2-1, but lost on the away goals rule. Which was a great goal in front of the Holt end. But overall, an overriding feeling of disappointment, because if I'd have taken my Nottingham Forest or even Liverpool form into a Villa shirt, I'd have been very happy, but it was far from that.
Now, you mentioned, you know, about you having to battle depression as well. Which do you think would have been the lesser of two evils? Would it have been the fact that, you know, you had to battle that, or losing out on John Gregory as a manager?
Well, I think John Gregory just didn't understand mental health issues. I mean, in football since then, you know, we've had tragic cases. You know, Gary Speed lost his life, took his own life. Robert Enke in Germany took his own life. And there was a poll by FIFPro, the World Players Agency, and the numbers are staggering of how many players that have mental health issues but don't talk about them. I was the first. I actually said, look, if I don't do something, I'm probably not going to be here in a month's time. But John Gregory was a very old school manager, roll your sleeves up, pull your socks up, usual very British attitude. But we met up and did a television show probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And we had a good discussion and he understood it a little bit more. But at that time, it was very much an old school attitude to anything that was perceived as weakness that you just had to battle through.
All right. Moving on.
England. Unfortunately, I mean, nowadays, I mean, you look at players like Harry Kane and Jamie Vardy, you score a couple of Premier League goals and you're in. Here, there's Ian Wright, there was an assist for a goal. And this was at the actual game. You see the little black ribbons. It was the first game after Princess Diana had died. So the mood was very sombre around Wembley Stadium. Paul Gascoigne, Ian Wright, and that's Phil Neville, who's obviously coaching now in Valencia. Is that even for players like Ian Wright, Andy Cole, Robbie Fowler, Teddy Sheringham, Alan Shearer, Nicky Barmby, Dion Dublin, Les Ferdinand, there were so many English strikers scoring 20, 25 goals that it was virtually impossible to get in the team. I had to score, like I say, 50 goals in 68 games for Nottingham Forest to get into a squad. Now, literally, if you're young and you're English and you've played 5 or 6 games, I mean, Dele Alli at Tottenham Hotspur is a classic example. He went from MK Dons, went to Spurs, scored 1 goal at the start of the season, played 3 more games and he was in an England squad. So I had to score 50 goals to get in one. He plays 4 Premier League games and gets in an England squad.
Yeah.
So disappointment again of not being in many England squads, but the highlight for me was at the end of this run we played Italy in Rome, a 0-0 draw, which got us qualification for the 1998 World Cup in France. I wasn't involved in that tournament, but I was involved in the qualification, and so the celebrations in Rome was fantastic.
Just to quote you on this, though, you said playing for England was abject boredom.
Yes,
Why
I
is
mean,
that?
because with England, when you play for some nations, and I used to
Yeah.
speak to some guys that played for Ireland or Scotland or some of the foreign guys, playing for their nations was fun. It was an honour, but it was fun.
Yeah.
With England, because all of the expectation about, you know, the home of football, the first football association, and it was always very stale, the environment.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of fun, so it became quite monotonous and boring. You'd have dinner, you'd go to bed, you'd wake up, have breakfast, train, go to bed. I think they've tried to change it now. I think they've tried to make more of a team philosophy. But yeah, in those days, I think speaking to a lot of the players, it was a great honour to wear the 3 lions.
Yeah.
But it was very boring.